Okay, good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to the City of Victorville Planning Commission meeting for June 14th, 2023. I'll call this meeting to order. Can we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Marsh?
Here.
Commissioner Messon?
Here.
Commissioner Thomas? Vice Chair Cook Askins is absent. Chair Kurth?
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you. Next, if you'll all please rise for the invocation that'll be led to us by Commissioner Thomas, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Heavenly Father, we come this evening just thanking you for allowing us to be here today. And Father, we ask that you bless this gathering, Father, bless the leadership here. Father, we ask special blessings on Commissioner Cook Askins. Father, just bathe him with your love and your touch. And Father, we hope that you'll bring him back to us. Father, we ask that the city council members all be, that you give them your blessings, guide them, guide the commission here. And Father, help us to make the right decisions for this community. We ask that you bless Victorville in Jesus' name. Amen.
Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This is the point of the meeting now for general public comments. If there's anyone here that would like to make a comment on an item that is not on tonight's agenda, now would be the time. Do we have any cards?
We do.
One speaker?
We have two speakers.
Oh, two speakers.
Did you want to read the intro to public comment?
Oh, no, not tonight.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks.
Our first speaker is Michael Grabhorn.
Good evening, city staff and planning commission. This is quite premature. I'm here representing the High Desert Community Coalition, and we have been working with city staff on a ordinance to regulate some of the different aspects of the smoke shops. The only reason I am presenting tonight is because we are also working with the Tobacco Coalition, which they're piggybacking on our ordinance, and they're presenting tonight, so I therefore was forced to also present. I respect the idea that that ordinance should be written up before it's discussed with the planning commission. But we are looking and have done assessments on smoke shops in Victorville. We have found many drug paraphernalia and implements that are used to smoke or ingest illegal substances. And so that's our part of the ordinance. And the rest, I guess, will be a surprise when it's finally written up. And I'd like to thank Mr. Scott Webb in the planning department and city code enforcement and all those that have been working with us. And again, I apologize for bringing this forward at a time that's kind of out of context. So thank you for your time, and I'm sure the Tobacco Coalition will fill you in on their part. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Our next speaker is Selena Times.
So tall. So good evening, Chairman Kurth, distinguished commissioners and city staff. My name is Selena Times, and I bring you greetings from the Victorville chapter of the Coalition for a Tobacco-Free San Bernardino County. We would like to first thank your planning department, Scott Webb, for meeting with us to learn about our concerns surrounding youth having illegal access to tobacco products, primarily through purchasing them at local retailers unlawfully, and exploring the opportunity for our city to implement a tobacco retail license to address this issue. This evening, I would like to share with you a grant opportunity being offered by the Department of Justice. The DOJ Prop 56 grant for years 2023 and 2024 is an excellent opportunity to complement the tobacco retail license ordinance that the city is exploring. This funding will help enforce the tobacco retail license during the implementation phase of this program. We understand that coming into compliance with California Senate Bill 793, which came into law on December 21st, 2022, outlawing the selling of flavored tobacco products at retail locations may seem like a daunting task. But because of this, we want to share with you this opportunity and are happy to report that other government agencies in San Bernardino County have previously received an award, including our neighbors in Hesperia. We hope you and the city staff find value in this information, and we are eagerly looking forward to reviewing the tobacco retail license ordinance that has been drafted in an upcoming meeting. We also acknowledge that the Deputy City Attorney and her team may not have public health legislation as an area of expertise. We would be happy to connect you with our partners at the Public Health Law Center, who have a long history of working on public health legislation, including tobacco retail licensing. They can answer any questions about the enforcement components of the ordinance. Our contact information is attached to the RFP that I'm going to be giving everyone. Also, feel free to contact us if you would like for our coalition to provide a letter of support to accompany your application for the DOJ Prop 56 grant opportunity. Thank you. And I have copies here for all of the commissioners and for the Deputy City Attorney and also for Planner Webb.
You can pass them up here.
Okay. And our contact info is on the first copy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your comments.
There are no additional speakers.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'll close the public hearing comment portion of the meeting. And we want move on to the approval of prior minutes from a meeting of May 10th, 2023.
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
I have a first by Commissioner Messin, a second by Commissioner Marsh. I'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Marsh,
Yes.
Commissioner Messin,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas, Chair Kurtz.
Yes,
Motion passes with Vice Chair Cook Askins being absent.
thank you. Moving on to our public hearing items. Item number 2, it appears that this is a request by the applicant and the city in conjunction to make a continuance on this item. Is there anything that staff would like to add other than that?
Yes, good evening, Chairman Kurth, fellow commissioners. Yeah, we just want to state on the record that the project was advertised. However, we did receive a comment from the Morongo Band of Mission Indians. We have consulted with them and we expect to have the project ready to be heard at the July 12th Planning Commission. So we respectfully ask that you continue it to that July 12th hearing.
Okay, thanks. I'll go ahead and open up the public hearing. Should we have any comments? Do we have any cards for number 2?
We do not.
Thank you. And is there anyone here that would like to speak to us on number 2? Okay, seeing no one, I would like to go ahead and make a motion to continue this item to the Planning Commission's July 12th, 2023 meeting.
I have a first by Chair Kurth, a second by Commissioner Thomas. I'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Marsh,
Yes.
Commissioner Messin,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas, Chair Kurth.
Yes.
Motion passes with Vice Chair Cook Askins being absent.
Thank you. And that moves us on to our new business item, item number 3, dealing with recreational vehicle parking requirements.
Thank you, Chairman Kurth, fellow commissioners. Some of the commission may recall back in 2019, we had a brief discussion on RV parking and some other items. At that time, we did not receive a clear consensus to move forward on adopting an ordinance, and then the world changed with COVID hitting. But we did think it was important to bring back the discussion to the commission. We have our code enforcement official, George Duran here, and also our assistant city planner, Alex Hadigi, that will give a brief presentation. But just to give you some background on why we're bringing this item back. In the mid 2000s, the city took action to eliminate RV parking within the front yard area. Then it was followed within a year or so after that with allowing a limited exception for RV parking within front yard, only within front of a third car garage. So that limited exception, in my opinion, and the opinion of the public and some of the staff that are dealing with this on an ongoing basis, basis is that it's created confusion because this exception is sending mixed messages to the public that, okay, well, it's allowed in this sense. Well, why isn't it allowed on my property? So we wanted to try to clear this up and give some options as far as grandfathering those that are legally permitted now. So if they did go out and buy an RV, we'd have a process where if they are parking in that front of their third car garage and in compliance, there would be a way to grandfather those. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Mr. Alex Hadigi at this point to give an overview, but we want to just have an open dialogue about the pros and cons of parking RVs in the front and our street side yard. And hopefully we can have a consensus by the end of the meeting.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Webb, members of the commission. We do have a PowerPoint queued up, Steve. The screen there, looks like. And you also have paper copies in front of you there. So the discussion today will discuss our recreational vehicle parking requirements, the current standards, the enforcement issues we encounter as a city staff, possible development code amendments, and implementation measures that we can take forward to address those issues in the future, should the planning commission wish to adjust our municipal code. So beginning with current standards, RV parking at this point in time is permitted rear yards and side yards. Parking is prohibited in front yards with the limited exception of third car garages, as Mr. Webb noted, and in street side yards. Street side yards are those properties on corner lots, which is essentially between the primary plane of the building and the right of way on the side of the house that faces the street that's not the front yard. And I have a graphic that'll show that a little better here. Slide number 3 shows our current allowances for RV parking. So on the right there, you'll see a third car garage example where an RV, that's a limited exception where cars can be parked within a front yard. On the left, you have a corner lot, and the hatched area there represents a home. So, and the blue line represents the primary plane of the building. So that indicates that an RV in a street side, in a corner lot, would not be permitted in the street yard, but it would be permitted in the rear yard. The challenges we currently have with the current standards, number one would be limited applicability. Majority of homes are not constructed with third or fourth car garage, so it really limits the ability of homeowners to park within the front yard. And it makes it confusing for a lot of homeowners, and they question why the neighbor can have it and they can't, with the only difference in their homes being that one has a third car garage and one doesn't. We also have RV size and encroachment into the right of way. Typically, homes are oriented with their garages facing the street with a minimum setback of 20 feet. That means the face of the garage is at the 20-foot setback, which limits the ability of any RV to park in that area to 20 feet. As you can imagine, once you start to add trailer hitches, trailer tongues, other apparatus, motors, things that might come off the RV, that they tend to be over 20 feet in length. So even in the instances where they're allowed to park in the front yard, if it's a minimum 20-foot yard setback, that would further prohibit RVs to park in the front yard. with that, I'm sorry. It would further limit the ability to park within the front yard because it'd be overhanging into the right of way, blocking the path of travel, blocking the sidewalk, so on and so forth. A recent item that has come up is side load garages. There's examples provided in your staff report. The municipal code, as currently written, was not developed to serve side load garages. So we're looking for some interpretation if we were not to change the code or not to proceed forward with adjusting our current municipal code allowances. We would look to the planning commission to provide some clarification on if side load garages, specifically with a third car garage, would be afforded the same allowances for parking in the front yard as those garages that have a third car that face the front. So that was just something that was never anticipated when this code was originally developed, and it's a challenge we currently face. And lastly, we would look at RV maintenance, appearance, view obstruction. While RVs are required to be registered to the property owner to be located on the property, RVs are not subject to any other kind of maintenance standards. So what the RVs look like, how they're maintained, is not something the city can really enforce in the front yard areas if they're parked there, as long as they're legally registered with the California Department of Motor Vehicles. Additionally, if you have an RV that's, let's say it's 19.5 feet and it's right in the property line, it could introduce some view obstructions for neighboring property owners exiting their property when there's a big RV or something parked there. If they were to pull out forward from their garage, it could potentially limit their visibility to the street when exiting. Included in the staff report and the attachments are the proposed amendments that staff has identified at this time to address the challenges that were noted. First and foremost would be to prohibit all RV parking within front yards. Second would be to clarify that RVs are prohibited as living quarters. This is something that's enforced currently, but this would solidify the city's ability to enforce that provision and clarify that they're not permitted as living quarters, even if they were parked in a permitted fashion in their rear yard. It would require RVs to be screened from public view. So if they were parked legally in a rear or side yard, they would have to be behind a fence or wall that screens them from public view. Obviously, some parts of those would still be visible, especially when you're dealing with a motorhome or a trailer. But it would initially screen a large majority of RVs that maybe park boats or trailers, things like that. It would require that access to RV parking is via an approved approach. Another issue that code enforcement typically sees is when people are trying to access their rear yards, they're typically doing that. If it's not through a driveway, they're doing it over a curb. So they either place blocks on the curb, or they sometimes will drive over the curb. Sometimes they will pour concrete in their front yard or drive over their front yard to access a side yard that doesn't have an access point. So that's another item that this would address with this proposed amendment that would ensure that any access is through a legally approved driveway approach. And lastly, as proposed, we would permit non-compliant RV parking for up to 72 hours. That would just be permitted by right. And this would be for things like loading, unloading, cleaning their RV for a few days over the weekend, something of that nature. And if there was a need to have that for a longer period of time, they would be able to seek a temporary use permit to allow the 7 days for that. And in non-compliant, an RV could be parked in front of a 2-car garage for that period of time. So even with the proposal before you, if it were to proceed forward, an RV, for instance, if a homeowner was home for the weekend or home from a trip and they wanted to unload it or load it, it could potentially be in their yard, but it just couldn't be stored there for a long period of time. City staff has also identified some additional allowances to consider. They weren't included in the proposed amendments, but they would be good additions to any proposed amendment in order to provide options for parking should we take away the front yard allowance. The first one would be to permit RV parking in street side yards. And the next slide we have here, there should be slide 7 in the paper form, shows what a street side yard is. Essentially, a street side yard, like I noted, is the area between the primary plane of the building on the street on the side of the home. Currently, that hatched area is not a permitted area. And I believe at the time, in going back in my memory here, there was a couple reasons. It was visibility, and it was also access. Frequently, homeowners on corner lots have the tendency to utilize our ADA ramps at intersections as a private driveway to access those side yards. So it was kind of a two-pronged approach to prevent that, and the visibility was another reason that it was prohibited. However, if we are going to consider removing the allowances from the front yard, it does pose an opportunity to allow more areas to park in the rear and side yards of the home. So that's another allowance that could be considered. And to go along with that, to hopefully ensure that the ADA curb ramps are not utilized as access, would be to update the Victorville Municipal Code to allow a secondary RV driveway approach. Currently, the city engineer does not allow those. However, he is in consensus with planning staff that it is something that if it was codified, we could consider, and there's potentially regulations we could put in place to ensure that they don't impact the entire frontage. Things like limiting them in size to a single driveway. In the case of corner lots, it would be limiting access from the side yard via secondary approach instead of the front yard. As you could imagine, if it was in the front yard in that case, you'd have a ADA curb ramp, a driveway approach, and then an RV approach, and there'd be really nowhere to park. So we have to be mindful of still maintaining areas of the street to park, nonetheless wanted to provide an opportunity for folks to park in rear and side yard. So if the planning commission decided to proceed forward with the recommendations of staff noted, it would be there would be a forthcoming code amendment proposed that would include allowances for a secondary RV driver approach with standards in place to make sure they're not impacting on-street parking or the ADA curb ramps. And lastly, staff would seek guidance from the planning commission on the implementation measure in order to proceed. Essentially, you have some properties out there now where they park in the front yard and it's legal. You park in front of the third car garage. They're less than 20 feet in length. They comply with code. So staff has identified two areas or two ways to potentially address that we could proceed forward with at the direction of the planning commission. The first would be to permit that non-conforming parking during a compliance period. And that could take two forms. One form would be that there's a compliance period of, let's say, 6 months. And then after that 6 months has ceased, they're just prohibited across all front yards. And there's no allowances to maintain any non-conforming that were there prior. Another option would be to have a 6-month compliance period. But within that compliance period would be to initiate a registration process where people with non-conforming RVs could register with the city, prove that they're legal non-conforming, that the RV had been purchased and registered to that location prior to the enactment of our code. And then after that 6-month period, there'd be a cutoff, and those would be the ones that were essentially grandfathered in. Another way to address legal non-conforming parking would be to permit it without a compliance period. And in that case, those that are legal and non-conforming would be able to maintain parking in their front yards in that way. And if they were cited by code enforcement for other reasons, or if code enforcement assumed that it was not a legal non-conforming issue, then that burden of proof would fall onto the property owner to prove that they are in fact legal and they've been there prior to the enactment of code. So there's a couple different ways to address that. Obviously, the first two would set a deadline and would involve varying levels of city staff time to initiate a registration process or enforce it. Whereas the second option, no compliance period, would just mean the code would go into effect, and as code enforcement goes throughout the city or there's complaints made, they would then at that point interact with the property owner to confirm if it is a legal non-conforming status, if it meets the requirements of our code to be maintained. With that, staff recommends that the planning commission review and discuss the city's current RV parking standards and either recommend that city staff proceed with preparing a Victorville Municipal Code amendment included herein with any requested revisions, and include measures to provide allowances for additional driveway approaches, clarify enforcement for future legally non-conforming front yard RV parking, and allow street side yard parking. That would be option A. Or option B, recommend that city staff maintain the development code as written and provide clarification that side load garages should or should not be afforded the front yard RV parking allowances pertaining to third and fourth car garages. And staff remains available for any questions you might have.
Thank you for that report. And I think before we jump into any discussion, I'd like to see first if there's anyone from the public that has any comments or input. So I do want to open up a public hearing and see if there's anybody here that had any cards on this one.
We do not.
We do not. Is there anyone that would like to make comments on this item that's here tonight? Okay, I'll close the public hearing portion and I'll bring it back to the commission. I have a feeling some of us will have some thoughts on this one, and I'll just open it up. Who would like to start? Go ahead.
I'll start. So for the permitted 72 hours up to 7 days, non-compliant RV parking, I don't know if either you or maybe our code enforcement officer can provide further information. How are we gonna go about someone who's parked for 72 hours, moves the RV slightly, but doesn't move it? Does that start over? Do they have to completely move it out of the way? Is it slightly moving it taken into consideration in that time frame? I know that tends to be an issue when parking citations is, well, I moved my car, even if I moved it a foot.
I can start maybe, and George, you can probably follow up with me on the actual code enforcement. So we can absolutely adjust the proposed amendments the way it's written now. It speaks to the 7-day period not being consecutive per annual quarter. That can definitely be elaborated upon in order to note the 72 hours cannot be consecutive in any month time or any time frame that the planning commission may see appropriate.
And then just one more, if if we decide to go with the 6 months compliance or the registered approved, would notices be sent to every homeowner in Victorville? Or how would we go about letting the public know in case they do have an RV and it's not registered?
Yeah, we would definitely have to initiate an outreach campaign. We don't typically, actually, I know we don't keep a registry of everyone who's in compliance with front yard RV parking standards. I would say we likely have a good idea through code enforcement records, but I don't know the undertaking that it would take to notice every property owner in the city residential. However, the outreach could take a few different forms. It could be newspaper, it could be on our social media pages. But yeah, that may pose a challenge to get the notice out to everyone. However, it would be possible at a cost, obviously, to notice every property owner.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Commissioner Marsh? I'll move on for a minute. Commissioner Thomas?
Can we have everybody speak into their microphone, please?
Commissioner Thomas?
Without plans period on it. How thank you. How would the city know when there was a new person moving in? Would this follow the residents, or would it actually be applicable to the current tenant, current owner?
It would have had to be registered to that homeowner prior to the enactment of code. So a new homeowner would not be afforded those same allowances.
I did have another, because you're talking about eliminating parking in the front yard, even in front of the 3-car garages. Am I saying with that?
For RVs, yes. For RVs, eliminating.
So, yeah, because I guess currently we have, a new trend of tandem garages anyway. So this would be a little confusing if it were left as is. So I think that the proposed changes are good. Okay.
Mr. Durant? Number one, thanks for showing up to be here. I had asked to have somebody. I didn't know we'd get the boss. Thank you.
You bet.
I knew that if some questions came up, you and your guys are the ones out on the beat, and you're dealing with this on a daily basis. I was curious. Up until this point, can you just kind of talk how your team enforces? Is it I'm sure there's some complaint based, right? But when they're out in the field doing their job, are they just being cognizant for these? And how does it work?
Thank you and good evening, Planning Commission members. Generally, the complaints, the actions are taken by complaint. It's reactionary. On occasion, we will see an RV that is quite large, clearly encroaching onto the right of way, or perhaps the tongue and the actual jack is actually on the sidewalk. At that point, it's a higher priority, but generally their officers are responding to a complaint. And first and foremost, we educate the resident. Often we understand the residents see large properties, see that they have large areas for parking, and the officers will knock on the door, explain the limitations of the regulations. It is where this confusion probably kind of ensues, is where, well, you have a 3-car garage, or you don't have a 3-car garage, but perhaps the neighbor does. And so there's some dialogue that happens between the homeowner who just doesn't understand why not me, but my neighbor can. And so it does create some challenges to gain some compliance and gain some support for the ordinance, I guess, and the laws that are set up. But generally there's a notice that goes out. We'll give some folks some time. 30 days usually is what we give, and we'll gladly give extension so long as it's reasonable and there's some sort of end plan for potentially the RV. Usually they're asking for time to find space to park it at an RV storage yard potentially, or make some modifications to their property if it allows it. On occasion, yeah, there are some situations where we get across, folks that just don't want to comply, and a notice of pendency will be recorded on the property, primarily just to kind of record the violation with the county, indicating that the property has some sort of violation, and after it could be subjected to fines.
Okay. And then what's your, you probably don't have the records here with you, but what's your best guess, like per month or maybe in the last year? How many interactions would you say that your folks have had with dealing with recreational vehicle these issues?
I would say we deal with them at least 5 to 10 times a week. RVs come and go. And so sometimes the complaints that we get are, oh, the RVs, is parked in this area. And so we want to give it a little bit of time, because as we understand, folks own RVs. Sometimes they want to bring it in to prep it up for a trip. And so, yeah, I would say about 5 to 10 times a week. I mean, we have the area split in 7 beats, and a majority, of course, of the larger lots are in the west side of the city, and so it's usually where we get the complaints.
Okay. Thanks. Commissioner Marsh?
Mine, I guess, is not so much a question, but you did say that one of the proposed amendments is to prohibit all RV parking in the front yard. For me, I guess it's just my thought is, because there's so many variables, you have 2-car garages, you have 3-car garages, you have tandem garages, to where the garage goes deep, it will hold multiple cars, but it looks like a 2-car garage, but it's just deep. So there's all kinds of variables. So for me, I think my thought process would be just to prohibit RV parking, period, in front yards. And then we wouldn't, because I mean, the individual homeowner trying to make sense of all the variables to stay in compliance, that's tough. And then for the city to have to contend with all the different variables, that's tough also. So to me, it's like a no-win situation, you know, so it should be something as simple as it's prohibited or it's not.
I'm in agreement with what Commissioner Marsh just stated, and I think another reasoning that I am in agreement with that statement and the prohibition in all of front areas of the house is I'm cognizant with my own neighborhood, which I'm sure we are with how things look and what issues might be there, but I've just kind of, since we had this item come up and we got this package last week, I did a little time just, on the back, driving to work and back. I would just take neighborhoods that I really don't drive through and just went and looped some blocks and it's, it's pretty typical that in Victorville, we have a lot of homes that are just only 2-car garages. And I do believe that I would say a majority of all homes in Victorville probably have 3 or more vehicles in reference to that house with drivers and cars. So there's, and the other thing too, I noticed is a good majority of people in Victorville don't park in their garage. It's just the driveway's the parking lot. So with that said, we notice lots of on-street parking by the residences because they can't even fit all their cars in their driveway, which is understandable. But then when we take larger recreational vehicles and boats and campers and trailers and try to fit all of those into the very small parking lots that we have, it pushes even more vehicles out onto the streets. And that for me is kind of a quality of life. It's the look. When you have so many vehicles packed in the streets, it's not as nice of a maintained look. And I know that in that case also our street cleaning crews and the street sweepers spend most of their driving around the vehicles, and then we see the weeds growing up in those curbs. So that's an issue too. So I don't really see a case for allowing all of these vehicles in the driveway, RV vehicles. With that being said, one of the other things that I've noticed is, and it was mentioned a little bit tonight, is a lot of these RVs, they look really old, dilapidated, almost kind of, some of them look burnt out, like they've been sitting there for so many years. And it really is an eyesore. And we've spent so much time, with this city developing our design guideline standards on a lot of these new neighborhoods and houses, and then to have a big, 12-foot tall, burnt out, ugly looking thing right on the street, that discourages me as well. So if we were to, and I am in agreement personally with the proposal for the grandfather ordinances. The legal non-conforming, and I personally am okay with if people have a motorhome or an RV in their driveway currently, and it complies with the 3-car garage, almost not sticking out into the right of way. I can't. I would hate to say, hey, you got 6 months and then you got to go figure something else out. That's not enough time. I think the ones that have it now deserve it, and the ones that are have been out of compliance, they need to continue to be notified. George, that your team's doing that. But I wish there was a way that we could figure out if the vehicle or the RV is not maintained and clearly blight. Is there any suggestions from staff on how we could handle that?
Yeah, one of the things I forgot to mention is, as it relates to RVs, we do verify registration. They have to be currently registered with the DMV. If it's a motorhome, of course, it has to be legally operable to be on the road, which includes the physical condition of no flat tires or anything like that. The aesthetic of it, of course, whether it's washed or not, we're limited to that, but we do verify, the legal ability for it to be driven on the road. In addition, we do also verify ownership if that is a question. We've had situations where perhaps a property's got multiple RVs, not very common for that to happen, but so we do verify registration to make sure that the RV is registered to that occupant at that time.
Thanks. Okay. Yeah, I just see that, I saw some and I see some on my street with, they have clearly flat tires. They haven't even been moved in a couple of years type of thing. And I did see, in my travels, a few instances of double, the side yard, they're in the side yard and they're in front of that in the driveway. There's two in a row.
Chairman.
Yes.
I think I totally agree with what you just said about permit without compliance period. I think it would only be fair for people with existing motorhomes to be grandfathered. But again, it would put an extra burden on code enforcement to go out there to determine what's new and what's not. So, and these permits would actually be required if they're going to, be non-conforming. So I'm okay with that. I think what I'm concerned about here, I like this. I'm glad that we're addressing this now because I've driven in cities, LA namely, where along streets there are just rows of motorhomes. They're dirty, they're burnt out, they're just, and I would never want to see anything like that up here. So I'm concerned about motorhomes being parked on the street for excessive periods as well, because there are some communities where you'll drive through and you'll see a motorhome that's been out there 3, 4, 5, 6 months, at a time. But I think we should discourage that. Should go ahead and enforce. I believe, what is it, 72 hours? I believe that something needs to be done in those cases. But I think overall that I'm good with this. Good with this because I know we need to put something in place for the future, and it should not be confusing. So I do believe this no front yard parking is going to be a good thing. Yeah. I had a neighbor that had one out, and I couldn't see down the street. When I pulled out on my right, I couldn't see approaching traffic, so it was dangerous. But
And Commissioner Thomas brought up the point on the, if we were to look at allowing legal non-conforming, if they're already, doing that with a shorter compliance period, or just allow them, without any kind of compliance, would that be an undue burden on your department? Would that be counteractive to what the staff trying to recommend here?
We could certainly consider ownership date as a starting point, assuming that, as an assumption, the ordinance was adopted today. And we received a complaint a year from now, the ownership changed at that time. We would know by just based on the transfer that they weren't an occupant of that property, or it transferred at least. Obviously, even if it could be a rental, so it might have just changed, ownership, but the tenure of that tenant is the same. We would have to consider that, but there are some possibilities.
So it's doable.
I would say yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Perhaps there's an opportunity as well if the planning commission would like for a hybrid. There could potentially be a permit without compliance period, but also an outreach campaign. Perhaps not direct, but social media channels and the city's website, notification at public events we might have, at concerts in the park, we can have signs up and things like that as we as city staff do our duties with that. So there's opportunities for a hybrid approach as well.
And the hybrid would be, I missed that first part of what you said, when it has to do with the compliance.
So if we were to proceed forward, let's say with the permit without compliance period, meaning code enforcement through their inspections of that property or through complaint would inquire with that property owner to that. To get ahead of that, we could also have an outreach campaign, maybe indirectly, meaning not directly to the property owner, but on our social media pages, on our website, at events, maybe here at City Hall with handouts, so people would be made aware of the allowances that are changing, the requirements are changing, but stopping short of noticing them directly to each one. Just throwing ideas that may be something the planning commission would also consider as well.
Okay. Yeah, because I think in reality, when I'm just guessing, when code enforcement is dealing with this, it's pretty easy for you to pull up and see, oh, this one has a third car garage and it's in compliance and it's not sticking out right away. But I wonder if this is one of those that has been there before we did this ordinance. It'd be pretty easy to find out on that one. Anyone else who's going to be parking motorhomes in their driveway, it's very clear they can't be there. So it might not be that much different, you know, much more burden for the code enforcement department.
I had another question. For the additional allowances to consider, are we going to consider the straight side yards parking as well, or are we not considering that?
What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, personally, if it's gated and fenced, in my opinion, it's part of the backyard. That's my personal opinion. But again, I think if we do allow that, we do have to distinguish what is front and side yard. I know that sometimes you have side yard, but it's cemented and it's an addition to your driveway, and you may not consider that front yard anymore. So I think that just needs to be clarified. Where the housing plane is, if it needs to be gated, where the gate should be. So I think those do need to be clarified if we are going to include side yard allowances.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that I'm looking at slide number 7. The one where it's the red hash marks would be that side yard, I think. And if somebody was to try to load an RV from the front into that side yard, of course you're going over the ADA ramp in that case. Would this situation ever work? Like front loading, in staff's opinion? When you have curbs and ADA?
Yeah, in a situation like that, we would likely address the associated municipal code amendment that would allow secondary drive approaches, and we would probably set limitations on how far from the intersection that would have to be set back or located, which would essentially place it in the side yard area towards the rear yard. So an access would come in from that side in lieu of the front yard. So that way we would do our best to prohibit utilizing that ADA ramp.
Okay, so then in that case, with Commissioner Messon's question, and being okay with the side yard, if this was the actual house, it seems like the RV would have to pull in towards the rear of the property line into the back rear yard area, but would be able to stick out into that side yard portion. But in this case, would not be parked right up next to and parallel with the house.
Correct. In limited instances, I would assume small RVs or apparatus may be able to make that turn, that 90-degree turn, but you're correct in what you noted, that it'd be essentially parked in the rear yard with some of it overhanging into the street side.
Mm-hmm. And it's fenced and screened and viewed. So what Commissioner Messon brought up, I'm in agreement with that allowance, as long as screened and.
Chairman, oh, sure, go ahead. I was assuming that there was no other comments. I wanted to just state that I don't believe there's any formal motion needed. I think the input that you've provided, there's a general consensus. We can now bring this back for you with more details in the coming months, and then notice it as a code amendment for consideration as part of a public hearing.
So the comments that all of us have made so far, is the commission pretty much in consensus with the direction we've been going? Okay.
Okay. And
So
what
as long as you have had enough, I do have one more though. When we're talking about the temporary use permit for somebody that may have a family coming to town and want to park, on their property there, for up to 7 days. What's the process? What do you think the process of that temporary use permit would be, and is there a cost to that?
So yeah, we can give some proposals in the upcoming ordinance, but that 7-day period right now is just for the street. And then it's limited to 72 hours if you're parking on your private property. So there is an opportunity there to clarify some of that confusion as well, because we have 2 different time periods right now. And it's a little bit backwards, I think, and some may think, oh, I should get more time if I park on my private property, but it's actually the opposite. You get more time to park on the street if you get a permit from the engineering department. So we'll clarify that and try to keep it consistent.
And one Okay, I have a question. As far as clarify, RVs prohibited as living quarters. Okay, now is that's going to be prohibited across the board. So if a family comes in from Arizona, they bring their RV, they park it on their family's property. They can't live. The family that's coming from Arizona can't reside in that RV for a month or however long they're staying. Right? It's prohibited as a living quarter.
Correct. My understanding, unless George has a different interpretation, is that RV that's stored on the street or the front yard is just for loading purposes. For them to reside in the primary residence, then depart to a different location.
Correct. Generally, what happens is folks can secure a permit through engineering for a 7-day permit, generally parked on the street, which then allows us to verify electronically that that RV is there temporarily, and people can we may find power or water hoses go into it temporarily. But I think in this draft, in this ordinance, it aims to provide some sort of measure for temporary uses when something like that occurs.
And do we, I was a little confused. Do we currently, is that currently our standard right now that you have to, that the people should or need to file for a permit from engineering to have it temporarily in front of their house on the street?
Yeah, it's something that we assist folks with. Obviously, when we receive complaints of a particular RV, people living in there, we
Because
inquire.
I don't think people are going to come in and do that. But if the neighbor calls, then it gets addressed and they must come in and do it.
Sure, and we'll obviously work with those folks. Even more importantly, the complainant who may just not be aware of what's happening. They may be misinterpreting what's happening.
So once again, most of this really is complaint based and dealt with, and we just want to try to make it a little clearer for you.
Generally.
Okay. I don't think any final comments. I think also it's, I forgot one thing too. I think it's important because I see a lot of the tongues of these trailers sticking into the public sidewalk, and I just can't imagine why, kids on bikes or people at night aren't hitting these, and what kind of liability could that be, not only for the property owner, but maybe the city, because it is public area. So do you have enough to draft up something and we can take a look at it? And
yes,
next time.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you very much for your input.
Okay, thanks. So then, with that, any final reports, Commissioner Thomas? Anything to report now that you're back and getting healthy?
Just glad to be back. Thank you.
Commissioner March?
I have nothing to report.
And Commissioner Messam?
Nothing, just I actually attended the Green Tree Extension ribbon cutting, and it was a great turnout. So just happy to be out there, and great work to all the staff. Thank you.
And I have nothing tonight. Anything from staff?
Thank you, Chairman Kurth, fellow commissioners. I just want to thank the audience members that came out and spoke today. I would like to give a report that staff will be bringing forward an item at the July meeting similar to the forum that we gave today on the RVs. We want to brief you on a proposed ordinance that would further regulate off-sale establishments for alcohol and tobacco, and get your input. And if you're supportive of that, that will also move forward to a code amendment as well.
And you said that would be, when are we expecting that?
Yeah, we'll have an initial discussion at the July 12th Planning Commission meeting.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and meeting adjourned.